As we enter the month of Av and commemorate the time of destruction and exile that took place during these days some 2,000 years ago, let's examine what it is that we lost, that we yearn to get back. In the famous words of Tehillim, we are told, Im eshkochech Yerushalayim tishkach yamini. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right arm lose its abilities. Many years ago, in Ottawa, Canada, I heard Rav Matisyahu Solomon ask the following fascinating question. Why Jerusalem? Why are we not focusing on forgetting the Beis HaMikdash, the spiritual epicenter of the Jewish people? What was special about Yerushalayim that we so need to remember? In Shemona Esrei, in the prayers that we say each and every day, an entire bracha focuses upon the prayer, Ul Yerushalayim ircho barachmin toshuv, to be returned to Yerushalayim. The Beis HaMikdash, the temple, is mentioned almost in passing in a later section of Shemona Esrei, of the prayers. Again, why the dominating focus on Jerusalem? Rav Shamshon Hirsch explains that while every city has its own unique ambiance and very specific culture, Yerushalayim was the paradigm city. Why? How? Now, rabbis see in the very name that the Torah tells us that was given to this city, Yerushalayim, there are two components that represent, in fact, what was originally two geographic sections, Yeru and Sholem. Yeru represents the upper Temple Mount, the upper mountain on the west side that was so named by Abraham as a place, Yeru, where Hashem Yireh, Hashem is seen. Sholayim comes from the word Sholem. Sholem was the eastern part before the unification into one Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, in the days of King David. Sholem represents the peaceful coexistence, the shalom, a very unique and palpable brotherhood that existed. This is expressed in Tehillim in the familiar words, Yerushalayim habenuya ki ir shechubra lo yachtov. Jerusalem was a city, King David tells us, that unified all its inhabitants. What does that mean? The Sefer HaChinuch, a Rishon, tells us that the reason for, or a reason at least for, the mitzvah of Meiser Sheni, of the second tithe, is because people live by their money. Jews tithed in a 7-year cycle. 4 of the 7 years, 10% of their entire harvest did not have to be given away, but it had to be eaten in Yerushalayim. That made it financially beneficial for every family throughout the country to have members of its family living in Jerusalem and Yerushalayim. Typically, it was the Torah scholars from each family that went to Yerushalayim to learn, and they were supported in great wealth by 10% of the harvest for 4 out of every 7 years. In fact, the Rambam tells us that this created such wealth, such largesse, that the Jews of Yerushalayim had more than they could use, and they showered their resources upon each other and upon the Ole Regel, the Jews that came on Shalosh Regalim, on the 3 Yom Tovim every year from throughout the country, and descended or ascended to Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim, and they were provided for in generous measure by the wealth of the Jews of Yerushalayim. But the question can be asked that when cities are settled by different groups, the history of New York City in the early 1900s, more regrettably even the history of Jerusalem in the 1800s and early 1900s, shows that when cities are settled by immigrants from different sectors, from different communities, from different geographical areas, they inevitably tend to live together, band together, and it creates a divisiveness from one group to the other. What unified the Jews of Jerusalem in such a special way? I'd like to suggest the answer in the following incident. The Rosh Hashiva of Kalman Epstein had a wife who was gravely ill, and it necessitated them spending Yom Kippur in a major New York hospital. On the morning of Yom Kippur, he went to a room to pray, to daven, and found himself with a collection of Jews from all over that also wound up having to spend Yom Kippur in a hospital because of a sick relative. The davening, he said, was particularly intense, meaningful, powerful. And in the course of the prayers that they said together, they felt a bond between each other forming in a very strong way. They asked Rav Epstein to say a few words, and this is what he said, commenting upon the feelings that they all were experiencing. He asked the following question. We talk at great length about the special unity that the Jews achieved at Har Sinai at the giving of the Torah. Vayichan Shah Neged Ahar, the Jews were like one person with one heart. What was so special about what happened at the giving of the Torah? Asked Rav Epstein. Weeks earlier, months earlier, years earlier, in Egypt, we are told that they achieved that same great unity, all the tribes working and feeling, suffering together, helping each other together, supporting the Levites, Shevet Levi, the tribe that was not in bondage and suffering. Perhaps, he says, that unity achieved under a common enemy or a common persecution, such a unity is not so special. It's perhaps instinctive. It's perhaps somewhat inevitable. But when in good times, when Jews bond together not because of a common enemy, but in a common goal, at the giving of the Torah, it was their shared vision, their shared acceptance of that great gift of Torah that caused all their differences to recede and melt away. So too, Rav Epstein says, in the course of prayer, of davening together, the commonality of their praying to Hashem seemed to transcend and rip away all the relatively meaningful differences that might be seen between them. I'd like to say that this is perhaps what happened in Yerushalayim. It was because of Yeru, It was because of the fact that the Jews of Jerusalem shared that common center of intense spirituality that was in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple. Because of that shared value between them, all the differences, the types of clothing they wore on their heads or on their bodies, the differences of dialect or background, or even levels of observance became so relatively meaningless. And it created this beautiful bond of brotherhood that was felt throughout the city. Ki'ir shechubru lo yachtov. In this paradigm of cities, it was a city of great spirituality, but that spirituality created great brotherhood. As we mourn the loss of that beautiful existence, it's important perhaps not just to reflect upon what was so special that we no longer have, but to use that focus to bring that value into our gullus, our exile, to focus on the commonality of faith that we share with so many Jews of so many with so many different backgrounds. There's so much that could divide us, but there's so much more important that can unite us. Let us allow the focus of what we share and the importance of that which we share to dwarf the differences that we might otherwise see. And in that merit, may we be brought speedily back to Yerushalayim Habenuya, to Jerusalem of old, to a Yerushalayim, to a Jerusalem that has not just the spirituality that we're missing, but also the brotherhood that we need. Shabbos.